Hey everybody, welcome to the Voxology podcast. Mike Erre here, and I'm recording with some friends live from Tennessee. Our friend Tim Stafford is, as you know, in California, and so he is not with us in the room, although we will probably record an intro to this. But one of the things that my church does in Tennessee is that we have some mental health specialists who attend our church, which we just absolutely love. And we have a podcast that we do called Journey on My Mind. The name of the church is Journey Church, and Journey on My Mind is a group of pastors and mental health professionals talking about issues of faith and psychology and all the interesting, juicy stuff. And so because May is Mental Health Awareness Month, and because John MacArthur started off May with certainly making some mental health opinions, making us aware of those things, I thought it'd be kind of fun, because we're all local, to do a bit of, we'll call it cross-pollination, guys. So to my left, if you're watching on the YouTubes, you're going to this looks so much better than what you usually get. So thank you to Edwin in this beautiful studio. If you're just listening to the smooth sound of our voices, imagining that we're much more handsome than we are, you want to keep that. You just want to stay in that sort of
don't turn on the YouTube.
So to my left, that voice that you hear, that succulent voice, is Kevin Dixon. Kevin is a partner in crime in terms of pickleball, also senior pastor here at Journey, and one of the co-hosts of the Journey on My Mind podcast. And then Lauren King, who we just found out often will schedule telehealth appointments. And you'll see that you have an appointment coming up with Dr. King. And there have been times, evidently, when the expectation of the patient about who was going to meet them was different than the reality. So, Lauren King, hello.
Yes, hello.
Let us know. Let me hear that voice that is not always. If I were expecting a Dr. King, because didn't you just say, what was the story you just told?
Yes, I just had a little buddy one time log on to telehealth who was a really young client, and he thought that I was going to be Dr. Martin Luther King and was really disappointed. Yeah. And I also had to tell him that Dr. Martin Luther King died. So not only am I not that awesome, I also...
You traumatized him.
I have to tell you, this person you were very excited to meet on telehealth has passed away.
Yes.
Awesome. Awesome and not. Dave Verhaagen. Dave has been on the Voxology podcast. We talked about one of your books last time, and both Lauren and Dave founded Southeast Psych, which is a very large mental health provider in this region of Tennessee. Would you agree with that?
Well, Dave founded Southeast Psych in North Carolina, and then I came to work for them in 2008, and then we started Southeast Psych Nashville together. But Southeast Psych is really his brainchild.
Well, here's what's great about leaving it that vague. All the Southeast is open.
That's right.
For location.
We cannot go north though, unless we're in the southeast of a state. Yes. I thought about that.
Oh,
we're in
so you could
southeast
do North Dakota,
Illinois.
Right?
I don't know. Yeah.
Interesting.
Yeah.
Now,
highly flexible.
What I want to do. So the Voxology audience, the sophisticated connoisseur that they are, either is already aware of or will have a disagreement with the quote I'm about to read that was making the rounds virally, appropriately enough. During the first week of Mental Health Awareness Month. So I'm going to read the quote, and then I want to just sort of walk through it very slowly, not using the quote only to provoke sort of conversation rather than, ragging on the person who said it. Although, this is consistent with the person who said it,
You're
kind
right.
of whatever. All right, so and I didn't see the context of the clip, but it was a 2-minute clip, and so there was enough context to understand.
It was a conference.
It was a conference. Okay, and did you see anything? Okay, yeah. So let me give you the thing, and then if you want to fill in some detail. So the clip I saw begins with the announcement that there's no such thing as PTSD, there's no such thing as OCD, there's no such thing as ADHD. Those are noble lies to basically give the excuse at the end of the day to medicate people. And Big Pharma is in charge of a lot of that. If you understand, take PTSD, for example, that really is, it's grief. You are fighting a war, you lost your buddies, you have a certain amount of survival guilt because you made it back, they didn't. How do you deal with the grief? Grief is a real thing, but grief is part of life. And if you can't navigate grief, you can't live life. But if you clinically define that, you give them a pill, a series of medications, and they end up in LA homeless on a sidewalk.
Wow, that's a jump there.
Yep. In regard to children, it's the most deadly thing that has been unleashed on children, namely medication. We are trying to make it clear to parents that behavior is essentially the result of choices that kids make. And if you parent them properly, they'll make right choices, because that's how it works beautifully. But if you blame it on something other than their choices and you identify them as having something they can't do anything about, but medicate that, you literally are turning your child into a potential, well, not only a potential drug addict, but maybe a potential criminal, because they never learn how to navigate life in a socially acceptable way. Now there is a view of the relationship between faith and psychology that is at root here. Mm-hmm. So I think we all agree, at least I think the vast majority of us agree, not sure we buy, a Bible teacher's take on this. But let's respond first to the question, are these medical diagnoses legitimate things, or does he have a point that these could either be spiritual issues, sin issues, or maybe it's just the normal part of life and, we don't need to classify it or medicate it? What would you say, Lauren?
Yeah, there's biological bases for specifically the mental health diagnoses he's naming.
Yeah.
We have a lot of research that shows that there's biological, neurological evidence that these exist. And how far do we take this? Do we start saying diabetes isn't real? Do we start saying, how far can this go? Yeah. It's really concerning. And I think that there is a little bit of a, in the last few years, this swing in our culture to sort of over pathologize some stuff. Mm-hmm. And now, like we do with most things, we're swinging the pendulum back to nothing is real, nothing is real. And that's really concerning because it feels like there are some people who may hear this and not get the help they need. And
certainly parents who will not pursue help for a kid that might need it. And for themselves too.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Well, we'll get to the kid part in a second because that's a separate issue. But I want to just start by saying, okay, so one of the counters to this is that there is a biological basis. This isn't just, hey, we're looking at a group of emotions and calling them something in order to medicate them. But there's actually something happening chemically. And is that relatively new? I grew up hearing that, if you're depressed, you just sort of get over it. You pull yourself up by the bootstraps, you pray more, you read your Bible more. How recent is that emphasis in your experience, Dave?
Well, I want to make a point that I don't think something has to be neurological or biochemical to be a real thing.
Oh, I like that. Yeah.
Right. So the way I think, let's use depression as an example. Yeah. It's possible that you could be diagnosably depressed without it being primarily genetic or biochemical.
Okay.
Primarily. So here's my analogy for this. I know people that have high blood pressure, and there's some people that have high blood pressure because their diet is poor, because they have high stress, because they sit on the couch and eat pork chops or Funyuns or whatever, like Kevin. I'm not making fun of that, but the point being, there can be environmental reasons why somebody has higher blood pressure. They're not managing their stress. They're not managing their diet and lifestyle. There also could be the possibility of having high blood pressure because everybody in your family has high blood pressure. There's a thick genetic component to it. So I tend to think of this and I'm making this up, this notion, but let's say you need a score, 10 points to be depressed. Is it possible that all 10 of that comes from circumstantial things? Sure. Is it possible that all 10 points comes from biochemical things? I'd say sure. Is it possible it's 5 and 5 or 3 and 7? Yeah. And so I don't think that we have to say only something that has a neurological or biochemical basis is real. That being said, I'll come to this in a bit, I hope. I'm not sure that in our field we always get that right in terms of what's lumped in under sort of the diagnostic manual. So I don't think we're in anywhere close to being in this perfect place.
Right.
But that's kind of a throwing the baby out with the bathwater. If I could point to these two things and say, I think that's kind of a muddy diagnosis or unclear, or doesn't have a good basis for it as an entity, that doesn't mean that all of that is untrue.
Yeah.
That there's no such thing as PTSD, OCD, ADHD, bipolar disorder, and that kind of thing. So, but to your bigger point, as we have understood the human brain, we have increasingly seen the sort of biochemical, neurological correlates of what is in many cases mental health diagnoses. In other words, the more we research it, the more clarity there is rather than less clarity. It's moving us toward more certainty rather than away from
and the certainty is that there can be and often is a biological part
for sure
to some of these things.
For sure.
Right. So that's the part that's becoming clearer rather than less clear.
And again, I would say absolutely yes to that, but it doesn't have to just be that.
I love that. No, I love that. That's I think that's a really, really big point. So when you medicate, I mean, and maybe just share for yourselves, like what's the philosophy of medicating some of these things?
We don't medicate people because we're psychologists, but typically, just like any medication,
or even if you recommended it,
you're thinking pros and cons, right? There are potential downsides to medication, there are side effects, but do the pros or the cons outweigh the pros you might benefit from with medication? And there's an example that's coming to mind, and feel free to add to this, but when antidepressants were first prescribed for adolescents, this black box warning came out after a while saying that it increased suicidality among adolescents. And there wasn't a large randomized clinical trial a large randomized clinical study that had shown that there was an increase in suicidal action, just in suicidal thinking. So the year the black box warning came out, actually there were way more suicides because the kids who needed medication were not getting it, right?
It went up by double digits within a year. Wow. It went up by about, I think, 13% in a year.
Yeah. So if you've got a child who's really suffering, you think, there are some downsides to potentially medicating this child. Yeah. But if they want to die, they're at high risk, they're miserable, we've done therapy, it's not working. Why wouldn't we try this thing that has shown, to work and to give relief to this person?
Can I drill down into a specific diagnosis
Absolutely.
that MacArthur referenced?
Yeah.
So we'll look at PTSD.
Yeah.
As I understand PTSD, it has evolved in our understanding of it, and even in its expression. So, for example, if you looked back in World War I, when soldiers got what they called shell shock, the way it would show up is jelly legs. They would collapse. They would walk and they couldn't. It was motor activity. When you got to World War II, it was ulcers and GI problems. When you got to Vietnam, it was intrusive thoughts, flashbacks, all the kind of what we now call PTSD. It's coming from the same origin, the same root, but it's getting culturally expressed. In other words, the group is telling you how to express it, but it's still there's a clear kind of common root to it. Medicine can help with some aspects of that, like getting a person's nervous system back online, kind of getting a person into a range of functioning so that they're not so swamped with anxious and depressed and debilitating thoughts. But really, most of the research for PTSD isn't around the efficacy or the benefit of medicine. It's around therapy. And in the past 20 years,
that's a huge point.
We have grown tremendously in our understanding of how to treat trauma. When my career first started, we were doing our best. But in the past couple of decades, man, we are in a bit of a golden age. I'll give you an example. I saw someone earlier today before we even met that after 2 sessions, and I can't describe as trauma because I don't want people to have that in their head, but it was pretty bad, pretty awful. It went from, rate this on a 0 to 10 scale of about a 9. After 3 sessions, he's saying it's about a 1.5.
Wow.
That's a tremendous gain in 3 weeks. So we know that medicine helps for some people. We know that therapy helps for some people. Nothing helps for everybody all the time. But exactly like Lauren said, medicine is always going to be one of these. It's a cost benefit, right? It's a trade-off.
Yeah.
When you go to bed and you decide, am I going to take a Tylenol PM? You're like, does the drowsiness and getting me to sleep outweigh the sluggishness in the morning?
Right.
I mean, you're always balancing out these kinds of effects and side effects with anything.
So there's research, of course, now that praying does something to your brain.
Yeah.
Exercise obviously releases healthy neurochemicals. Meditation.
Yeah.
So is there something to? I'm assuming MacArthur, if he were pressed to recommend action, if you're feeling these things, and we're not going to label them, he would say, read your Bible, pray, get fresh air, those sorts of things. And there is some evidence that those things are helpful. How should we as Christians hear some of this kind of spiritual language that says two things? It's a spiritual problem, so it requires a spiritual solution. And even if you're saying it's a biological problem, there are like spiritual things that do affect you physically. So why the need for medication or talk therapy or I mean, and I'm obviously playing devil's advocate because I've personally benefited massively from medication and therapy.
Yeah.
But how would you respond to that? Because there's this view gets Christianized with a theology that says these are spiritual issues, and so I mean, spiritual solutions should work.
Yeah, I guess I'm thinking, like if my child had asthma, I would pray and I would do recommended behaviors, with my child to help them. But I also would seek the care of a professional, and I would not hesitate to do medication. I don't think it's necessarily one or the other. It feels very black and white. That why can't we do both?
And healthy faith and broadly spirituality, when it's healthy, can be very healing and good, but it may not be everything a person needs, in the same way that if a person has a physical illness, it may not be to pray may not be the where you stop. You may do that in addition to other actions like seeking medical treatment for it. So I don't think it's much different in that respect. The other angle on this, though, I will say is, even though I would agree that in the research, prayer comes out very favorably, it also depends on what the condition is. Because there are actually some conditions, OCD being one of them, that if the message to a person is pray more, you're actually feeding the monster a bit. And it can actually make that potentially worse. Would you agree, Lauren?
Yeah, especially if they have religious OCD.
Right.
And you're just feeding a compulsion.
Yeah, I don't have that.
Yeah, so there's some, there's some discernment and wisdom in that.
And Dave, you've said this, and I think both of you to some degree have said this a few times, but I think this helps bring some clarity on our perspective of this, is that as therapists, you guys are pro-faith in general. Yeah. But it's not a faith-based style that's probably the wrong, or biblical counseling you guys do. You do. But a psychologist that's worth their salt or will mostly lean into people's faith, not pull them away from it.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Even a person who's not a Christian or Christ follower,
right,
will affirm someone's faith and will work in that context. This idea that someone's going to see a therapist and they're going to pull them off into some kind of, atheistic or crazy spirituality is, I'm sure that could happen. It's just not how good practitioners work. It's not how good therapists work.
So one of the responses to this is, we want to treat the whole person. And so, of course, spirituality is a huge part of that. But that's not the only part of it. When you get to this, I mean, would you guys, and I'm asking your personal kind of opinion on this, part of the critique that this individual's making is that we're a pill-happy culture.
Mm-hmm.
And so in what ways do you agree with that, and what ways do you disagree with that? You know, are we guilty of over-medicating on some of these things?
Probably at some point, you know, I mean, I think it depends on the person. Some families I work with want to try every possible thing before they go toward medication. And I do think some people are very quick to jump to medication without, you know, trying anything else. But I think to just say, okay, yes, big pharma has a piece in this, and maybe we're over medicating, jumping from that to you shouldn't ever medicate anyone with a mental health problem is pretty dangerous.
Yeah. We'll get to that
in a second. I agree with what you say. In our practice, it's more common for someone to come in and say, I'll do anything but medicine than it is to say, where can I get medicine?
Yeah.
Now, I'm sure that there are sectors where people are quick to want medicine as the first thing. But for us, that's not what we get. We get, whether it's for themselves or their child, you know, we'll do whatever we need to, but we don't want to do medicine. And so sometimes our job is to at least open the possibilities of let's put all good options on the table. But the analogy I would use is let's take painkillers, which are not for psychiatry or psychology.
Right.
Is it true that painkillers are overprescribed? Yeah, they were for sure. I mean, we know that. Is it true that all painkillers are bad? Of course not. Then they're all unnecessary. No. And so there's this sort of polarized thinking that isn't wise. It's just unwise to go like, well, because things are overprescribed, then that's all bad.
Yeah.
It can be true that things are, including in psychiatry. I think that there are pockets of, I'm certain there are psychiatrists that are very quick to prescribe medicine without doing due diligence or just throwing something after it. That's not, that doesn't negate the whole practice.
That's good. Only, as Obi-Wan Kenobi said, only Sith deal in absolutes. Let's talk about kids for a second, because this seems like a separate category, and he even pulls it out as a separate category of potential harm. And Lauren, you were saying previously that the danger here is so stigmatizing the treatment that these kids are, you know, or the parents that are advising the kids just shut down the possibility that this could be a good thing. So when he says, in regards to children, it's the most deadly thing that's been unleashed on children. True or false? Dave, Lauren.
I say false.
Okay.
Yeah, and I think specifically about, you know, my specialty is in eating disorders, and it is has the highest mortality rate of any mental illness that there is. And
Really?
Not only do I become concerned that those kids are not going to get the help they need and become very, very ill or die, the other risk is shame. Is just if you believe, hey, just start thinking good about your body, or just stop, knock it off and eat. You know, if that's the idea, like pray more and you will feel better.
Yeah.
I work with a lot of young women, young men who have incredibly dedicated faith, who love God so much, and they can't understand why. I keep praying, I keep wishing this will go away, and it won't. I can't stop it. I feel immense guilt and fear every time I try to eat. You know, to tell them, just stop it. And if you have strong enough faith, this will go away. They're already, like, the core of their mental illness is shame. I feel like I am not good enough. So you're just mounting on top of that.
Yeah,
and
that makes sense.
You know, the longer it takes to get better with an eating disorder, the worse the prognosis is. So catching it early really matters. Catching it early, naming it. Knowledge is power. People get better if they catch it faster. The longer it's allowed to go, the less likely the person is to get better.
Man, that's brutal. So we're not turning them into potential criminals and drug addicts by medicating them?
Well, I'll add a piece of it.
Yeah.
research to the contrary. So I'll be specific. He mentioned ADHD, and so I want to name the things he's talking about specifically.
Yeah.
The idea that ADHD is this sort of
Yeah.
culturally fabricated idea is just patently false. It exists in every culture. It exists with relatively same prevalence. It's not this sort of 20th century American invention. And we have mountains of evidence that show the neurological basis for it. But here's the interesting thing. If you don't manage either through, behavioral means, therapy, medicine, the majority of those kids will develop incredibly oppositional and defiant behavior. If you continue to not manage that, almost half of those kids will develop major rule-breaking behavior to the point of criminal behavior, which also leads to other things, including substance abuse, criminal behavior. Your risk of those things happening is higher if you don't do the things that he's talking about.
What? So he's wrong?
He could be wrong.
I mean, what?
Yeah, even though he's written a lot of commentaries
On the Bible.
on
yes.
the Bible,
It's
it's
so
possible
good.
that he is also wrong.
Kevin, true or false? Studying the Bible makes you an expert on mental health. True or false?
I'm going to say false.
Okay, excellent.
Thank you.
Excellent.
Yeah, I'm-
So how I think one of the things that we misunderstand in this realm is what the role of faith is, or what even faith kind of turns out to be. We can just get better if we believe we can get better, or pray in enough faith, and if we don't, of course, then it's our fault, or whatever it is. So from a Christian perspective, and I want you guys to speak as Christians, how do you integrate Jesus following into this? Because the way this was always presented to me, this being psychology, was discipleship is Bible study and prayer and fasting and solitude and silence and church going and evangelism and giving and the whole thing. But then there's this other thing if you're sick. And it's a different thing. It's not, you're not doing spiritual formation when you're over here. You're like getting treated for a disease or something. And my experience has been just the reverse. My experience has been, I actually feel more spiritually formed when I'm in therapy, and because medication has allowed me to engage in some of the therapeutic, exercises I wouldn't have been able to do otherwise. I feel like it's a part of spiritual formation. I don't feel like discipleship is this thing over here, and then psychology is this other thing that's over here. How do you guys work that out as individuals and beneficiaries yourselves, and not just practitioners? Does that make sense?
Lauren's the expert on this because her doctoral program was literally a program of integration of faith and psychology.
Yeah. I would say I'm not an expert, but
Which is also
She is.
Thank you.
false, by the
Yeah, I
way.
was
But-
just
No,
gonna say,
she
well,
is.
well.
Just,
But I'm going to give a very simple answer, though, which is I feel like as Christ followers, we're called to meet people in their pain and help them. And so that is what psychology is seeing someone's pain and saying, I'm with you in it and I want to help you. It's not saying what you're going through isn't real. Get over it. I don't think that's what we're called to as Christ followers. I just don't think that's what the life and works of Jesus show.
Absolutely. So to broaden that into a whole program of study. So what are some of the things, as you were doing some of your academic work, that were surprising or allowed you to live in this reality that it's a holistic, that what you're doing is contributing to spiritual formation? Do you know what I'm asking?
Yeah, I mean, I think
Because that's a great statement. I'm just like, I'm feeling like there's more
Depths.
and I want more.
Yeah, I mean, I was in youth ministry before I went to seminary and got my doctorate in psychology, and so I had kids who were in youth group who had really big struggles that I could not help them with, what I knew as a little youth intern.
Yeah,
and
right.
it wasn't better or worse knowledge, but it was different knowledge, and so the way that I started to view it is that, although like my identity as a Christian is sort of my dominant identity, under that umbrella is I just like if I were a medical doctor and I could learn skills to help me be able to support someone, under that same umbrella, I can learn psychological skills to be able to help a child and sort of further their ability to be healthy and be in a healthy relationship with God through those skills that they are kind of different skill sets, but that they are complementary in actually a pretty easy way. It's not that complex.
I love that.
They don't seem opposing to me.
Yeah. Yeah. Why do you think they seem opposing? Before we get to you, Dave, why do you think they seem to be opposing to so many people in the faith community?
Yeah,
What do you think it's the root of that?
I feel like that goes back to like days of Freud, right? I mean, they have always seemed culturally to be so opposing. Like they can't go together. Like this is our way of solving things as psychology. And then Christians feel like, well, then you're saying something different than me. My way of solving things is spiritual. And again, it's just us getting very stuck in those black and white ways of thinking.
I would add, there's some truth to that. The early days of psychiatry, I think we're fairly hostile to faith. I don't think that's an unfair criticism, but that is back in the day. I mean, we're talking about pushing a century ago almost, so the early roots of psychiatry with all the Freudian stuff and looking at faith as being some sort of placebo or something. There was a little animosity from psychiatry, psychology to faith and vice versa. That's not where we are now. And so there's not been an evolution in the church about seeing that psychology actually has grown in a way that makes room for healthy faith as being a good part of someone's well-being. I think there's also maybe even a deeper part, though, that's going on to kind of reference MacArthur. And this is, maybe I'm bundling something that shouldn't be tied together, but this whole movement of how empathy is such a bad thing and
that's part of this,
the sin of empathy. Yeah. There's a movement in evangelicalism culturally, which is the sort of like, we're making people victims and shut up and get over it. And kind of that sort of a more hostile view of people that are struggling or in need, which I think is a horrible development in the church. But that, I think this is part and parcel of why there's sort of a holding on to this, because it's like all those therapists are just babying people and they're making them all a bunch of victims and they're gonna turn them into criminals and all that kind of stuff. So, the piece I'd add to what Lauren was saying, which is great, is we did a study here of about 700 people in this church
last summer. And
the findings in summary were spiritually healthy people are emotionally healthy people, and emotionally healthy people tend to be spiritually healthy people. And that's consistent with other research too, is that when you, as a psychologist, a therapist, address emotional well-being, you're actually, as you testified to, making it easier to be a spiritually healthy person. And when someone is bringing in spiritual health, it's actually leading to more emotional health as well. So they feed each other very nicely.
Yeah. A couple more quick questions, and this one is totally self-serving because Kevin's here, and obviously, I don't know do you come here?
Yeah.
Okay, I didn't know.
Yeah.
I mean, I
like hide in the back.
Yeah, totally.
Yeah, it's hard for me to hide in the back because
you and Ellen sit in the second row.
My wife is
Ellen,
a big presence.
Yes, she's
a
wonderful.
Big personality.
And this is going to appear self-serving, but I think our audience, we get asked a lot, what should I look for in a church? And so we often say,
I was wondering where you were going.
Yeah.
Okay.
So how do you, if what we're saying is this is for many a very legitimate, beautiful part of spiritual formation into Christ-likeness, what should we look for in churches that are markers of spiritual health? Not you, Kevin.
Yep.
I want these two. And again, I know it appears self-serving because you're here, but maybe you're here just because it's the shortest, drive or something.
But that's how Lauren makes all her decisions, by the way.
So
all parts of life.
yeah.
That's
And the building's so cool. And Kevin is very stylish.
By the way,
Her husband designed it.
her husband designed the building.
Well, and I find out more and more, like an
go.
onion. But what, like, even just generally, what should people look for in faith communities that are markers of health?
Yeah. The first things that come to mind are sort of like lack of narcissism up front, openness to criticism. I think kind of connectedness. Those would be things I would look for.
All right. I love you, and you give such great, concise answers. But let's explore. Let's talk about narcissism for a second.
Yeah.
What does narcissism often look like? Because from what I understand, there are different kinds of narcissism. Not all of them are classically narcissistic.
Right. Yeah. I mean, I would say if there's leadership in place where they are the final authority, they cannot be questioned, that would be concerning to me, right? That obviously you have to have a leader, you have to have a teacher, and that all makes good sense. But when it's, I am the leader, you cannot question me. When I am questioned, I'm wounded by it, I retaliate. Those are things that would be really concerning to me.
Yeah. I'm glad I asked that. What else did you say, though? You said narcissism.
Yeah,
you said connectedness. What do you mean by that?
Yeah, just that there's a community that feels, authentic and real, that you feel like you could be a part of, that you could build real relationships within. I don't think it matters how many programs or Sunday school classes or like shiny things you have.
Yeah.
It's more just, are people really connecting to one another and trying to be vulnerable with each other?
So it's not performative as much as, okay.
Yeah.
All right. That's really great.
Yeah.
Dave, what would you say?
I'd say when we had a all-church dinner recently, the common theme that came out was authenticity, among other things. I think that's absolutely the thing I would look for. I am
How does that play out?
I'm in a place in my faith where the performative stuff, you have to say a certain thing and kind of toe a party line, and and from up front, the story sharing feels like it's, even when a person's putting themselves in a vulnerable spot in the story, it's really kind of self-promotional.
Yeah.
Those kinds
They're
of
still
things.
heroic.
They're still heroic.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I think part of what's happened, again, particularly in evangelical churches, to Lauren's point, is that we've built these narcissistic cultures. And there's a leader who is charismatic. And I did a training for a big church one time, and they took me back to where the staff waited or had
green
break.
room,
kind of a green room. And there was a poster the size of this of the senior pastor.
Yeah. You can't see that in the shot, but Kevin's picture's right over
It's right there.
right over there.
And it's massive. It's like wall size.
It's
It's
it is.
really, and it's very attractive.
Yeah.
Lord have mercy.
But that sort of, even if it has this sort of fun or edgy or cool feel to it, it can be a very narcissistic culture that's built around a personality.
Yeah.
And so I would look for a modeling of leadership that is we're co-journeyers.
Yeah.
Right. We're
Be a good name for a church.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Co-journey.
Yeah. Exactly.
That's the spinoff.
Exactly.
Yeah. And that authenticity, I think, is big. There was a survey of Gen Zers and I think some millennials, and one of the things that they said, and this has never come up to my knowledge, is that one of the big things they look for in a church is, do they address mental health issues in an honest, direct, accepting way? And I think increasingly that's going to be the case as well.
Yeah.
I don't think that churches need to be truly therapeutic cultures in the way that I might think about that, and I wouldn't want that, but more of like an openness to what the conversation we're having.
Yeah. This is a legitimate part of faith.
Right.
Absolutely.
It's a part of faith. It's not antithetical. It doesn't pull away from. It doesn't, nor does it supplant. Like it doesn't take precedent over.
Right. So, there were many reasons I wanted to have this conversation. They all lined up beautifully. One is we have this great resource in our church, not just the two of you, but we have, one of the things I personally look for are therapists and spiritual directors at home in your church? Like, as somebody who has some responsibility, like, that's a sign of health or not, depending on how you answer that. And so we've got this incredible resource here. But also, I know for some of you guys, and because you email us and tell us about how much pain and how much struggle, I thought for some of you, maybe the Journey on My Mind podcast with this crew could be a helpful thing. So I wanted to introduce you to that in case there's more, you're in a place where you can't get the help you need, or you can't afford it, or don't have time, or whatever it is. Because you guys are talking about stuff like this every week, right?
Yeah.
And then the other reason is, I mean, anytime we have somebody, and this is where pastors, I mean, one of the ways pastoral narcissism looks, the way I see it, is expertise far beyond, or claiming expertise far beyond any real expertise that someone would have. So you made the joke about, someone who's written lots of commentaries on the Bible now is, and you're just like, I mean, that's when Paul says knowledge puffs up. This is one of the ways it looks. And so I really wanted us to respond a bit to this. So thank you, guys. Where can we find you online?
JourneyTN.com. Just go to our media page and you'll find us there.
Perfect.
Yeah. Like me personally?
Well, yeah.
Oh, southeastsightnashville.com. That's our website, right?
Same for me.
Perfect. I love it. So thank you, guys. The reason I didn't want Tim Stafford here is,
and we didn't either, by the way. We all voted. And
Tim Stafford, first of all, he's much meaner than he comes across, and then secondly, he has no issues. He can't relate to this at all, and so it's like, why do you want to bring someone who can't relate into this conversation?
Right.
So Stafford, we love you. We wish you were here so we could do this kind of thing together. Yes. Anyway, thank you guys so much.
Thanks.
Till next time, friends. Bye.